It wouldn't be an NFL offseason if the Dallas Cowboys weren't at the top of most headlines. Certainly, their quarterback is always going to be one that steals the show. Dak Prescott, earlier this year, he made a proclamation that he would not have more than 10 interceptions this coming year. So far in training camp, last check, he's already thrown multiple interceptions, 2, 3, I believe, as of this recording. So it's not off to a great start. I mean, the Dallas defense is good. They're certainly going to challenge people this year, and they'll challenge their own quarterback in practice. But for a guy that made again, definitive proclamation, I will not throw double-digit interceptions this year. To have multiple interceptions in training camp is not a good look. What do you think of Dak this coming season, Kyle? Do you think that he's going to bounce back, be a Pro Bowl level quarterback again? Or do you think last year is kind of a sign of things to come?
It's interesting because Dak last year, if I remember correctly, he had a whole bunch of interceptions, but remember he broke his hand at the start of the season, and so he only played in 12 games. He had a 91.1 passer rating, which was about a league average quarterback, but the Dallas Cowboys were one of the 3 best teams in the NFC, or like one of the 3 good teams in the NFC last year, because the NFC was just terrible outside of San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Dallas. I don't know exactly how to weigh the good or the bad with Dak Prescott, but I know some people really started feeling the Cooper Rush fever for a few weeks until the last game before Dak came back, when Cooper Rush got benched for whoever was their third string quarterback because he was just so awful. The Cowboys don't have a better option in the tank, but I think the reason this conversation is coming up is, one, like you said, it's the Dallas Cowboys, and 2, this is actually the first time the Cowboys can actually make a change at the quarterback position. Like the last 2 years, people have been like, is Dak the long-term guy with the Cowboys? Because people kind of think of Dak like a little bit above that QB purgatory tier of quarterbacks like Derek Carr. But I mean, you're lower on Dak Prescott than I am, but still, like, he was a league average quarterback last year. And anytime you have a league average quarterback, you're going to have the questions about what his future is going to be like with that team. This is the first year they can actually move off of him. So they do have an option to upgrade or just move on from Dak Prescott at the end of the season this year. And depending on how they want to spread out the money, they could potentially save a whole bunch of it against the salary cap if they split it over 2 years instead of just taking the $60 million cap hit at the end of this year. So the Cowboys are kind of in that in-between space. And this is the first time that those conversations actually hold some merit, because if Dak Prescott plays another league average season or below average season, there's going to be some people clamoring for Dak Prescott to move on, just like Ezekiel Elliott and Amari Cooper and Jalen Smith and all of the Cowboys that used to be the stars of the team before they pivoted to Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb and all the new guys.
Yeah, so you mentioned the injury last year. So yeah, Dak Prescott only played 13 games, but in those 13 games, he had 17 interceptions. He was a turnover machine. And, that's not even counting like fumbles and everything in the playoff game too. Not even counted into his total like interception line for the year. In the playoff game, he has multiple interceptions against the 49ers. You can forgive Dak Prescott's shortcomings when he's not turning the ball over, but if he starts turning into a turnover machine, that's when it becomes an issue, because this goes back to the conversation when Dak first initially got his big contract. How much of a multiplier is Dak Prescott to the talent around him? Is it the talent around him that is propping him up? And now that we're at this point, too, where the Dallas Cowboys can no longer hang their hat on having the best offensive line in football. In fact, right now, they're currently dealing with a holdout situation with Zach Martin. Now that that's gone, now that the talent at the wide receiving position has changed for them, now that Ezekiel Elliott isn't in that backfield being the all-pro level, top 5 leading rusher in the league, a lot more pressure is put on Dak Prescott to be that guy that props up the offense. And if we're going to have the conversations about guys like Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, again, all of these guys who we kind of like see in a similar tier, then it's only fair to have the conversation about Dak, because Dak also is getting paid significantly more than any of those guys, or at least at certain times, depending on when you check at the contracts, was getting paid more than a lot of those guys. When he got first initially paid, he certainly was.
So here's where it kind of differs with Dak Prescott. And I've always for years dismissed the people who say, look at Dak Prescott's raw numbers. Look at the 10 interception season in 2018, or look at the interceptions that he 13 in 2017, 11 in 2019. Like, I've always dismissed the people who talk about that because the Kellen Moore offense was always Dak Prescott throwing 45 passes a game. Like, that's the offense they wanted to run, was run as many plays as possible, and we're just going to throw the ball all over the yard. I'm looking up the numbers here. Dak Prescott had 500 passing yard attempts in 2017. He had 526 in Kellen Moore's first season as offensive coordinator, 596 in 2019. Then he broke his leg, but he was on pace to throw over 600 passes that season. Remember the joke about Dak Prescott was like the league's leading passer in yards 3 weeks after he broke his leg that season because they were just throwing the ball so much. In 2021, 596 passing attempts for Dak Prescott. So he's throwing the ball more often. That's why he's going to have more interceptions. It's just the probabilities. In terms of interceptions per pass attempt, Dak Prescott's actually one of the lower ranked quarterbacks in the NFL. And same kind of goes for last year. But last year's where it starts to change because he only threw the ball 400 times and had 17 interceptions. And Kellen Moore is no longer the offensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. It's Brian Schottenheimer. For those who don't remember who Brian Schottenheimer is, he's the guy who, one, has been fired from like 3 different offensive coordinator jobs, but 2, he's the person who was the anti-let Russ cook offensive coordinator. They let Russ cook. He couldn't do anything in the offense that one year, and then they replaced him with Brian Schottenheimer because Pete Carroll said, you don't get to cook anymore. We're going to get Brian Schottenheimer, the most boring offensive coordinator you can possibly find. So Brian Schottenheimer is the new coordinator, not Kellen Moore. They're probably not going to throw the ball all over the yard as much as possible, which, hey, I wouldn't have hired Brian Schottenheimer, but good luck to you, Jerry Jones, for making the call. And if that's the offense they're going to run, Dak's numbers are going to look a little closer to other quarterbacks around the league. And because their offense isn't going to be so exceptional, you're going to get a little bit more of a representative sample size on Dak Prescott this year.
Now, I guess I could give Dak a little bit of grace. In last year, they did lose Amari Cooper. So you subtract Amari Cooper and his route running from the offense, and you insert Michael Gallup, who was coming off injury. Gosh, who was the other guy that came in for just a few weeks, caught a bunch of touchdowns? Noah Brown, I want to say. Mm-hmm. You insert lesser talent at that secondary receiving positions. Dalton Schultz was probably their best secondary pass catcher aside from CeeDee Lamb. This year, they do bring in Brandon Cooks, and I've always said about Brandon Cooks that I think he's the most underrated wide receiver in the league. You just look at his box scores, it's 1,000-yard season, 1,000-yard season, 1,000-yard season. He's even more underrated than Mike Evans, like in terms of ability. I think 2 people unfairly judge him because he's had injuries at unfortunate times in his career, particularly when he got knocked out in the Super Bowl. But Brandon Cooks has been one of the better wide receivers over the last 10-year stretch. I think also what diminishes his value is how often he gets moved off teams. But the guy's been a great wide receiver under Drew Brees. He's played with Tom Brady. He's has some cachet in the league and will bring.
I think he had a 1,500-yard season with Jared Goff too.
Yeah, he'll bring some added value to the pass catching unit for the Cowboys. Now, they did also lose Dalton Schultz too, so they did lose some talent at that position. And a lot of pressure is going to be on Tony Pollard too. Franchise tag year. We've talked about it. Pollard's going to play on that franchise tag. But now that Zeke is gone, he's the main guy. he's the top guy in that backfield too. You know, all that kind of plays into what Dak Prescott will do this coming season. Will the numbers look as bad as they did last year? No, I don't think he'll throw a league leading 17 interceptions like last year. But if you told me he had double-digit interceptions against his creed, I would say I could see it just because it does seem like he's been more willing to force the issue. I think he is for the Cowboys to really succeed, especially with the defense they have, less is probably more for them. Like you mentioned how many pass attempts he had under Kellen Moore, right? If they cut that in half, I don't think that would be an issue because their defense is really good. If you just take advantage of that defense, keeping the ball on the ground, ball control offense, you mentioned limited pass attempts deep down the field, they can win a lot of games just doing that. They don't have to play outside of themselves. Again, I think part of the issue and why people unfairly judge Dak Prescott at times is you kind of want a guy that's getting paid as much as Dak Prescott to be more than that. But that might be the best situation for the Cowboys to be the best version of themselves.
I don't think cutting it in half is the best situation because that would be like 22 pass attempts a game, and then you're just game managing Dak Prescott.
But yeah, but at the same time, 22 pass attempts a game, that actually might not be terrible.
But then you're just game managing Dak Prescott, and I think Dak Prescott is still so much more of a quarterback than a game manager at this stage of his career.
But at least last year wouldn't be an indication of that. Now he can change that. He can prove me wrong here, but I would say that he's kind of about that tier. You can win a lot of games within that tier. It just, you do want to see that he does have that ability that if the Cowboys back against the wall need him to be more, that he can. I don't know if he still can, but that's up for Dak Prescott to answer for me this coming season.
If the Cowboys are going to replicate the offensive production they had last year, which understandably was worse than it was in previous years, but because they were like 12th in the league in offense last year, but their defense was top 5, and that's how they ended up being 11-5 or 12-5 and beat the shit out of Tampa Bay in that playoff game last year. If the Cowboys are going to replicate that offensive production, then you're going to want to draft CeeDee Lamb on your fantasy teams, because CeeDee Lamb is going to become a top 5 wide receiver this year in that offense if the Cowboys are going to replicate the offensive production they had last year. And if Dak is going to play like an above average quarterback, it's going to be because some of those passes that would have been incompletions to, say, Noah Brown, or bobbled passes that end up turning into interceptions, those passes are going to CeeDee Lamb, and CeeDee Lamb is going to be able to beat the double press coverages and the one-on-ones with the best corners in the NFL. This is going to be a breakout season for CeeDee Lamb. And I'm not saying like CeeDee Lamb hasn't been great this year. I'm saying like him and Justin Jefferson as the 2 leading receivers in the NFL. That's what's going to have to happen if the Cowboys are even going to be a top 10 offense this year, because the rest of that offense is not very good. I know they have Brandon Cooks. I know they have Michael Gallup. It's going to have to be CeeDee Lamb and the CeeDee Lamb show on that offense this year, because he's their best player on offense.
Again, what I think Brandon Cooks brings to the offense, though, you look at, again, the interceptions in the playoff game, I'll go back to against San Francisco. Yeah, and Michael Gallup literally quit on a route. I don't think Brandon Cooks is going to do that. So that will be a game changer in itself.
Yes, but when Brandon Cooks inevitably misses his 5 games a season due to injury, his replacement as the number 4 receiver is someone named Simi Fehoko, who I am just learning about right now as the number 4 receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. So it is a thin receiver room, and I don't think of Brandon Cooks Brandon Cooks has been wasting away in Houston the last couple of years, but I don't think of Brandon Cooks as this like upper echelon player who has to replace the production of Dalton Schultz, which, for people who don't know how good Dalton Schultz was last year, Dalton Schultz for the Cowboys was basically Mark Andrews on the Ravens.
Okay,
like his production in the receiving game was great.
I will push back, though, on Brandon Cooks missing 5 games a season. 2021, 16 games played. 2022, he played 13, but we know that there was some extra stuff going on there in Houston. 2020, 15 games played. 2019, 14 games played. 2018, 16 games. 2017, 16 games. 2016, 16 games. 2015, 16 games. And 2014, his rookie year, 10 games. So, concerns on Brandon Cooks are so overblown. It's just, again, unfortunate times that he's experienced his injuries. It's kind of like Marcus Mariota. People think he's one of the most injury-prone quarterbacks in the league, but if you really look, it's just he got hurt in like pivotal games, unfortunately, for them.
Marcus Mariota, the joke is always questionable to return with Mariota. He started the game, whether he finished was always a question, but I didn't mean that in like the Brandon Cooks sense. I know Brandon Cooks has been relatively healthy. I just meant you can bet on any NFL receiver to miss 4 games in a season. Like, say it's Michael Gallup who missed games with injuries last year. Every NFL receiver could miss 4 games in a season.
I would say that's technically it's a bad bet, given that technically he maybe misses 1.
But
Most
besides the point,
years.
the Brandon Cooks is a fine receiver. Fair enough. He's a number 2 receiver. They're going to ask him to replicate the production lost by Dalton Schultz. They are going to succeed because of CeeDee Lamb and the CeeDee Lamb show. And by the way, we started to see that in the playoff game last year when Tony Pollard got hurt in the playoff game last year against the 49ers. And when Tony Pollard went out, it became, we run the offense through CeeDee Lamb. We go as far as CeeDee Lamb takes us. And I think the final score of that game was like 17-13 or something like that. Like the Cowboys just could not do anything against, granted, the best defense in the NFL, but they just couldn't really do anything in the playoff game on offense when it became the CeeDee Lamb show. So if they're going to replicate production this year, it's going to be on the backs of their best player, and their best player is supposed to be CeeDee Lamb.
I think most teams would say their best player is supposed to be their quarterback in Dak Prescott, which, ultimately is coming back to it. The playoff game is the biggest indictment on Dak going into the season. Can he be better than what he was against the 49ers? Now, you would say, oh, he showed out against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but also we looked at that Tampa team from last year and thought, do they really belong here in that playoff game? The Cowboys, like you said, they were within a 1 score most of the game. The biggest problem is just drive killing interceptions. Dak just needs to correct that part of his game. He can't be a turnover machine. If he's a game manager, I think that's personally fine. I think that's the sweet spot for the Cowboys this year.
The benefit of having a top 5 defense is you get more leeway on offense. Whereas years ago, before Micah Parsons, the Cowboys had these top 5 offenses that were putting up crazy amounts of points, and they were going 8-8 because they couldn't stop anyone to save their life. So that's the benefit of having a top defense, is you have more leeway to work with on offense. And I think Dak Prescott is in the same tier of quarterback as Jalen Hurts right now. Now, if Jalen Hurts has another breakout season, I think he jumps up into that tier 2. But I think Dak Prescott is a tier 3 quarterback. He's like in that 8 to 12 range of quarterbacks. And that's how good I think CeeDee Lamb is going to be.
I think he's closer to 12 than he is to 8.
Fair enough. Like I said, it's semantics between the tier of, that group of 8 to 11 or 8 to 12. It's like, pick your favorites between that group. But the broader point I was saying is I believe Dak Prescott is still that above average quarterback. And I think CeeDee Lamb is better at what he does than Dak Prescott will be at what he does, because the Cowboys, if they are going to be a top 10 offense this year, CeeDee Lamb is going to be top 5 in the league in receiving yards. And that is what they need in terms of production. And he's their number 1 receiver with a smoking gun. I'm not going to say it's going to look like the Justin Jefferson offense with Minnesota, because Minnesota is going to throw the ball 50 times a game, and Justin Jefferson's the only receiver that they got. And Justin Jefferson is just a better receiver than CeeDee Lamb. But CeeDee Lamb is right there in terms of best young receivers in the NFL. And he could be this season, say, their Jamar Chase. And him putting up 1,500 yards is actually in the realm of possibility. And if that happens, the Cowboys are going to be just fine on offense. Does it mean they're going to win a Super Bowl? No, but I don't think there's really anything the Cowboys can do to win a Super Bowl other than the Eagles getting hurt and the 49ers getting hurt and good fortune going their way in a playoff game. So Dak I don't think he's going to be game managed like you're talking about, but I do think he's going to be it's going to be a slower offense. It's going to be more methodical with running. It's going to be more screen passes and more short field plays like you're talking about. I don't know if you want to call that reining in Dak Prescott, but it's just the offensive philosophy they've chosen. They moved on from Kellen Moore and chose bland ass Brian Schottenheimer. So this is the call that they're making on the offensive side of the ball.
I would say probably the nightmare situation is for the Chargers offense to look amazing this year, and for the Cowboys to regress and potentially miss the playoffs. I think, Mike McCarthy is certainly more on the hot seat than Dak Prescott is, if anything. Even if, let's say, this is a disaster season, Cowboys miss the playoffs, Dak's fine 1 more year potentially. I think Mike McCarthy is going to be the one that gets the inevitable axe, and then it's going to fall on Dak Prescott.
Yes, and can I just put out here, it is July 30th at the time we're recording this. Let me just put this out here so that I can be ahead of it. I think it was a mistake to fire Kellen Moore. Okay. I think it was a mistake for the Cowboys to move on from Kellen Moore and specifically to hire Brian Schottenheimer. Okay. They're moving with the trend of the NFL. Last year, for those who don't know, offense was down to its second lowest levels since 2000 in the NFL last year. And it wasn't a byproduct of, oh, teams are running the ball more or, offense is down because defenses have improved. Teams were just running less plays. Like the adjustment of Kansas City and Buffalo and Cincinnati having these incredible offenses that just score points like nobody's business. The correction the rest of the league made is play 2 high safeties because that slowed down Mahomes in 2021. And on offense, just run less plays. If we run fewer plays, it's less opportunity for these star quarterbacks to just beat the crap out of us every time we play. So if the league is zigging to slowing down offense and running less plays, the Cowboys are zigging right along with them because they are going to Brian Schottenheimer as their offensive coordinator, which again, I think is a mistake. I don't agree with what the Cowboys are doing on the offensive side of the ball. At the same time, they have made their bed. They're going to sleep in it. And if Dak Prescott or Mike McCarthy are going to be the fall guys for what ends up happening this season with the Cowboys, which could be a disaster on offense, that's just the decision they've made, and they're going to live with the consequences, and Mike McCarthy probably gets fired. However, I do think it would be weird if Dak Prescott has an awful, awful season and people don't, again, we'll have to see what happens, but people don't point to the new offensive coordinator, the Mike McCarthy thing, the losing Dalton Schultz, and perhaps injuries or something like that. I know I'm already preemptively making excuses for Dak Prescott, but I'm just saying if it ends up being a bad year for the Cowboys offense and they underachieve, I don't think Dak Prescott's the person I'm pointing the finger at first. There's a lot of extenuating circumstances around the Cowboys that I think would be more likely to be the cause of fault than Dak Prescott.
Well, if there is any coaching errors, I certainly hope that Sean Payton will be the one to point them out for us. But anyway, guys, let us know below in the comments section what you think of this upcoming Cowboys season. Do you think this is a make or break season for Dak Prescott? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.